Meeting to order. And we're going to continue item number 4, although we have one speaker on the item. Mr. Miller, do you still want to speak, although we're going to hold the item? Okay, so let's begin with item number 1, and I expect my colleague, Mr. Zine, to be joining us shortly when his other meeting is finished.
For item 1, the City Administrative Officer and the City Planning Department has submitted reports, and this has to do with staffing and funding associated with the transition of land use authority previously managed by the former Community Redevelopment Agency. This item is also referred to Budget and Finance and Planning and Land Use Management Committees.
Okay, if we could have Cio and Planning Department come up and report on the item.
Good afternoon, Council Member. My name is Madeline Rackley, and I'm here with CAO. As you know, Assembly Bill 1X26 dissolved the city's Community Redevelopment Agency in February of this year. Consequently, Council instructed the Planning Department to prepare an ordinance to transfer the land use-related functions of the former CRA to the city. The Planning Department submitted a plan to absorb those responsibilities, and Council then asked the CAO to report on the fiscal impact of that proposed transfer of authority. The report before you today includes recommendations for staffing and funding for the Planning Department and the fiscal impact of adopting those recommendations. Initially, the Planning Department requested 11 resolution positions to support this work. If approved, the annual cost would be approximately $1.4 million, including related costs. The Planning Department, after some discussions, agreed to divide the hiring into 2 phases. So phase 1 would then include 6 resolution positions, and later the Planning Department, working with the CAO, would evaluate the work program and determine when to hire those additional 5 staff if they are indeed needed. The annual cost for then the 6 positions of phase 1 would be almost $800,000, including related costs. But if they're hired by December 1st, which was the original goal, the cost for 7 months would be a little less than $500,000 for this fiscal year. Funding for these positions was not provided in the current budget, and furthermore, the CRA tax increment has already been incorporated as a general fund revenue in the budget. So given the city's limited resources, the CAO recommends using the unappropriated balance layoff avoidance line item to pay for the 6 positions during the current fiscal year. There are additional potential sources of funding, including AB 1290 funds. Also, the Planning Department states it would be willing to investigate imposing a fee to pay for these positions. To determine whether or not the fees would be legal, the Planning Department would need to engage a consultant to conduct a fee study, and who would determine that and also establish the fee. The CAO supports the transfer of the CRA Land Use Authority to the city, and I'm here to answer any questions about the personnel and funding side, and planning is here also to comment on the request.
Do you have any comments before we start asking questions?
I'm Eva Yuan McDaniel, Planning Department Deputy Director. No, I do not have any comments right now, but if you have any questions, we're here to answer.
Okay, well, I've got a few. I'm sure Mr. Zine does as well. Exactly what are the land use authority functions of the CRA that will be performed by planning once this change is made?
I think the first question I will have to ask Kim Bernstein to come up and answer.
Maybe we should grab another chair up there too. Might make life a little easier.
Good afternoon, Council members. Ken Bernstein, Principal City Planner for the Policy Planning and Historic Resources Division of the Planning Department. And we have brought forward this request in part because of the tremendous uncertainty that still exists in this post-redevelopment world, that the redevelopment agency as we know it no longer exists, but there are 31 redevelopment plans that, although the agency and its now staff is really a skeletal crew at the successor agency, the designated local authority. The 31 redevelopment plans and the land use provisions associated with those plans do still exist, and those are a wide range. Essentially, all development that takes place in those 31 redevelopment project areas requires a finding of conformance with the redevelopment plans. To give you a sense of
even though there is no redevelopment agency.
Even though there's no redevelopment agency, and there is a considerable range of authorities. In some cases, it is design review that takes place. For example, North Hollywood is one of those project areas. I know both of you are very familiar with that area. Property owners and developers can only take advantage of their full development rights to build out their projects with approval of what was the redevelopment agency in conformance with the redevelopment plans. There's also design review in the North Hollywood redevelopment project area to ensure that there's compatibility of all projects with the community and with the existing fabric that's in North Hollywood. So these are not authorities that the planning department has currently. And without someone to do that staff work to process those permits, all of those development projects have a cloud of uncertainty hanging over them. And to give you a sense, there are about 2,500 permit requests in those 31 project areas this past year, and what's at stake economically is about 1/4 of the development citywide. Last year there was almost $800 million in valuation of the building permit activity in those 31 project areas out of about $3.3 billion in construction citywide. So what we're talking about is this cloud of uncertainty that exists over about 1/4 of the development in the city, and no one left over at CRA to perform those reviews and that work. So that's what's at stake here.
Now, the report says that the planning department continues to have a concern that if the city doesn't take over jurisdiction over CRA assets, we may be at risk. What legal challenges are we facing in that scenario?
Well, I think if there are potential challenges, perhaps, if the city fails to make findings of conformance, if there is no one to perform that work, many projects could be stalled or not be able to move forward altogether. So there is certainly risk of potential litigation from the development community. On the other side, if the city or if no one continues to perform the reviews, whether it's design regulations, historic preservation reviews, other controls that have been put in place in those redevelopment plans to protect communities, there could be a threat of litigation from those communities that have come to rely on those protections, including reviews under the California Environmental Quality Act. So while it's difficult to speculate, there's risk on all sides. And
do we know if staff is going to be integrated into other planning work, or whether they'll just do the CRA piece and then another planner might do the subdivision work and another planner might deal with specific plan issues or design review issues? I'm wondering if we are going to do what the business community has asked us over and over not to do and wind up assigning different planners for different pieces of a project, or whether the person that does the CRA work will be able to do all the related.
That's a great question. Our department and our director, Michael Legrand, is here. Under his leadership, we've moved toward we have a reorganization that has as one of its hallmarks one project, one planner, and a much more integrated approach toward our development review and case processing. And
right, and that's why I'm asking this question. I feel that unless we are approaching this properly, we might disrupt some of the good work that we've done in that direction.
This staffing request is based on our review with the existing CRA staff of what it would take to process these requests in 31 project areas, again, looking at about 2,500 permit requests that the CRA has been dealing with in those areas. Having said that, we do now have a geographically based organization. We have a plan implementation division of the department that takes the lead on our project review, and we anticipate that the new staff, most of the new staff, would be integrated into that plan implementation division. So it would supplement the staff that is doing that work, because in many cases, these are projects we're not seeing today. They don't come to us. They are being signed off in terms of those permit requests by the CRA, but we would be handling it within the geographies and within the structure of our plan implementation division to avoid the type of kind of silo approach or potential duplication that you're concerned about.
Thank you. And if the planning department were going to enact a new fee to pay for these positions, would we run up against a Prop 26 issue? Has the department or the city attorney's office, anybody looked at this question?
Thanks for asking, Councilmember. That would be determined as a result of the fee study. A consultant would need to determine whether there was a legal nexus, whether or not a fee could even be applied in this situation, and it would then be defensible. Then we would ask the city attorney to write an ordinance for
Now, I
that.
know we're looking at spending $25,000 for a consultant.
That's a rough estimate. It might be less.
Is that primarily to determine the question I asked about whether it's a Prop 26 question?
It would determine whether or not it can be feasibly done legally, and the consultant would then also recommend how to structure the fee itself, so we'd know how much money would be generated.
Mr. Zion, questions?
Can we just implement a 2% increase in filing fees from 3% to 5% for the planning department?
That is the general plan maintenance fee. You're correct. That was just approved in council last week. That was to support the comprehensive zoning code reform initiative, which is a multi-year initiative.
Those fees are going up 2%.
Correct.
So where would these fees be applied?
There's absolutely no guarantee that there would be a fee applied. The study would say whether or not a fee is even possible in this situation, and then the planning department and council would still have an opportunity to determine whether it would be applied.
All right, so if Mr. LeGrand could come up and get on the firing seat. He's used to that, aren't you, Michael? Between you and Ken up there, I can't be too brutal. Oh, you talk about the 31 areas. How many of those in my district? 30? Between that and North Hollywood, Lancashire, and Laurel Canyon, one of the concerns I have is we've got land in my district, CRA. Right now, they say it's a clouded title. Developers don't want to touch it. It's abandoned. It's become an eyesore. We need to do something with it. Will moving forward on these positions do something to bring closure? Because CRA's been gone for over a year. Maybe it's 2 years. And the problem is, and you know the district as well as I do, Kent, along Sherman Way, which is a major corridor in Reseda, we had a project that was supposed to be developed, CIM. They bailed on it. We've got buildings that have been tagged, homeless, a real eyesore in the community, and the community is very upset. They keep saying, do something. Will this help us do something with those particular buildings as well as other projects within the 3rd Council District? And I'm sure my colleagues that have CRA areas are concerned about doing something. It's been idle for so long, and then we get a developer who says, we don't touch it because there's clouded title, because, you know, who owns it, who doesn't own it. I mean, we need to come to some closure. Will this do something? And I support putting people to work to get things done, but the concern I have is we've got 31 CRA areas that have basically been abandoned. It's like you left a baby on the corner and walked away, and someone's got to pick that baby up and tend and care for it. So what's going to happen?
Mike LeGrand for the record. As the CRA or the DLA disposes of assets that are currently under CRA's review, I think you'll see a lot of those titles clear up. The staffing here is more to provide certainty for that one private development that isn't getting funding from CRA, that doesn't exist anymore and can't enter into those financial contracts, but a private developer wants to step up and utilize those properties. There'll be a certain path forward. They'll know where to go. They'll know how to get that certainty. They'll know that the lights are on. The people they deal with in the community plan level will be the same people they can deal with on these projects to know that, okay, here's what the process is, here's what the regulations are, and here's a roadmap to get through it. Rather than right now, there's a lot of uncertainty on who handles those projects, how long will the review take, what's the process if they need to make amendments or changes to some of the guiding factors in CRA areas. So a lot of that will be cleaned up. But the financial mechanism where CRA partners in the project, that's still something that has to be disposed of through the joint powers in the DLA process.
Because a lot of these developers say, well, we have the funds. We just want to make sure that we have clear title on it. And I didn't know there was this cloud on the title, but that's what they're concerned about. They're not looking for money. They're just looking to get that title clear so they can take that land and do whatever they want to do with it. The other question is, we have projects where the CRA completed the facade, and now the people who did the work are coming around saying, we'd like to be paid. And the folks who run those businesses are saying, we agreed to this, but the CRA was supposed to take care of it. And now these businesses are getting liens put on their property from the folks that did the work. Will this help clear some of that up, or any of that up? Are you aware of that, Ken, that problem?
I have heard that. Unfortunately, Councilman, it will not. And just to be clear, our request here is very limited in scope. Unfortunately, the city is not undertaking all of the duties. We did not elect to become a successor agency to the CRA, and all that the Department of City Planning is requesting here, it is limited strictly to the land use authorities, so not assuming any financial obligations as a successor entity to the CRA. The affordable housing issues, as you know, I think, are a separate issue that has been worked out with the LA Housing Department. This is a very limited request in its scope, but very important, dealing with development and land use reviews, which is an economic driver in these 31 communities throughout the city.
So can you give me a suggestion of how we deal with that other part of it?
I would suggest, if you haven't already, to sit down with the members of the three-member board of the successor agency, the designated local authority, and Nelson Rising is the chair of that board, Mealy Semkin and Tim McCosker are the three board members who are overseeing that process, and I think it would be helpful to sit down with them to go over some of these concerns.
Because it's troubling that these businesses, they turn to me and say, fix it, and I say, hey, how am I going to fix it? When it's got such an issue? And I'm sure a lot of other businesses are facing that same situation. The other question I had is on the dollars. It's CAO advised the CRA MOU does not require the city to hire CRA employees. So are we looking to give them preference to somebody, or are we just going to open it up to everyone?
Currently, the way the proposal is written is for regularized positions within the planning department. We have had the conversations internally whether or not exempt positions may make more sense due to the fact that the funding and the fee study are still uncertain at this point. So that's a direction we would take your guidance in, navigating through. But depending upon if any of those, the way it's currently written, any of the employees at CRA would have to be on an existing list and a classification within the planning department that we're hiring from in order to be eligible for these positions.
And then it says the impact on the general fund is $465,000 for 2012-13, possibly $1.4 million thereafter for salary-related costs and new positions. Funding was not provided in the budget. The CAO recommends using the UB for that. And then there's the issue about the $25,000 for the study. We keep talking about deficit. The CAO talks about how we don't have money for this, that, and the other. Do we have this sufficient funds in the UB to take care of this?
I'll let the CAO respond to that.
Or can it magically appear from somewhere?
The UB layoff avoidance line item includes funding to pay for this.
Okay. How much do we have in the UB?
I don't know the total, but for this layoff avoidance item, there's $8 million.
$8 million? So we have sufficient funds to take care of this. Okay. Well, I have to talk to those other three people to take care of my other problem. All right, I'll make a motion.
I still have speakers from the public. So
I'll still make a motion.
Okay,
After the speakers, how's that?
that's perfect.
Okay.
First speaker is Steve Koffroth, followed by Michael Davies and Marissa Alcaraz.
Thank you, council members. Steve Koffroth with the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees. As you probably know, we've been here several times before. AFSCME represents the CRA workers who are currently doing the planning work, although they are a small handful now, and many more that were doing the planning work who have since been laid off or forced to retire because of the closing of the CRA. And I know it seems like it's been forever, but it was just December of this last year that the substantial portion of those employees were laid off. And we are with you in terms of lamenting the dissolution of the CRA and the problems that it have caused for the city. And it's the reason why we are here advocating that the City Council find a way to transition the employees who were formerly doing that work. They are very skilled and know the planning areas very well, are equipped to take on those responsibilities very quickly. And it's my understanding that according to the report, the idea is to staff first, then accept the responsibility, in which case you're going to need some folks who actually know how to do this work on an ongoing basis. But under the current structure, you won't be able to do so unless you exempt those positions, at least offering the opportunity for CRA-LA employees to have a shot at filling those positions. We obviously feel they're very qualified to do so. We think that the city would find the same. They just need the opportunity to be able to get into those spots. And just to add, to the vision of planning in terms of being able to be broader in scope, these employees would certainly be in a position to be able to help train other staff with respect to what's involved in redevelopment with respect to planning activities. So we would respectfully ask that those positions be exempted so CRA employees can transition and help the city even further. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Davies?
Good afternoon. Wish to speak in favor of the CEO report with the qualification. Of course, they've gone for bare bones in terms of the staffing. Relative to qualifications, having worked in the field for any number of years, I'd have to differ from my union brother in that if indeed there isn't going to be duplication of effort, my experience has always been with CRA staff who may know redevelopment plans well and redevelopment law, but they don't know general plan law, they don't know the city's general plan, typically know even less about the zoning code. So it really is incumbent, if this is to be efficient and effective, to use city planning staff or individuals from the planning series based on their qualification for our series, because even when there's similarity in titles between what the agency had and what the city and its planning series had, very often the actual task, duties, knowledges were not the same. And frankly, it's much easier for a city planning associate or city planner or senior city planner to school up on redevelopment plans, all of which had to go through the City Planning Commission to be adopted anyway, so there was city planning staff involvement. For them to school up on redevelopment plans versus agency staff trying to learn the zoning code and learn the city's general plan. If there's one other item I'd like to bring up, and this came up at Budget and Finance yesterday, I noticed that the recommendation is that even after all these committees and their review in CAO, this would go through managed hiring, which I really, in speaking of redundancy, I don't know how much more redundant it can get. So if the intent really is to get folks on board and moving by December 1st, managed hiring after all of this review and analysis really seems simply another impediment to being able to start on time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very accurate statement, I must say.
Marissa Alcaraz?
Good afternoon, Marissa Alcaraz from Councilmember Richard Alarcon's office. The councilman unfortunately couldn't join you here today, but he asked me to read a brief statement to you in regards to the item. I agree with the CAO report before the committee today in that we should transition land use authority previously managed by the former CRA to the planning department and hire the necessary staff, but we should also be discussing how to hire the staff. I believe the positions in the report should be exempt in order to allow former CRA employees to compete and to widen the pool of qualified candidates and give the department the maximum flexibility to hire the best qualified candidates for the task. I would ask that my colleagues consider adding this recommendation to their committee report. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me ask a couple more questions and then I'll entertain Mr. Zine's motion. first on the funding for these positions. Does it make more sense to create these positions out of money that's set aside to mitigate layoffs, or does it make more sense to use AB 1290 funds?
Oh, goodness.
Because neither one seems ideal.
Neither one is an ideal situation, but maybe.
I mean, you may or may not wind up hiring people from the defunct CRA and avoiding layoffs there, but then you're sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul because you're taking it from a layoff mitigation fund, and then you wind up laying people off in LAPD or whatever the other positions were that were originally recommended for layoffs.
Councilmember Patty Huber, Assistant CAO. We did offer AB 1290 as an alternative source within the context of the report. However, those funds are not, those are really within council's control to allocate. They go to a special fund, and council generally allocates them primarily via motion for specific projects. So it left us in a very difficult position. The council members who have funds coming to them from the redevelopment project areas that is now designated as AB 1290 would have to be willing to provide those funds for these positions. That was not something that we were in a position to negotiate. That would be something that would have to be done with council.
Right, and from my own perspective, personally, I would always rather avoid layoffs as the first choice. On the other hand, I'm not in the most objective position because I don't have any of those funds and any of those projects in my district, so I don't feel the pain of losing those projects. So I'm not sure where I am on that one. Mr. Zine, yes.
If I can just comment, with regard to those AB 1290 funds, there have been discussions in the last few years about using those funds for other purposes. However, after numerous discussions in council, it was determined that, for the most part, many of those funds are allocated for future bond payments, in some instances for future projects that have already been approved, and so it's making ongoing payments. So some districts actually have those dollars already allocated. With regard to the UB monies that are set aside for layoff mitigation, it's our understanding through the financial status report that as part of the positions that were added back to the budget, that the departments, for the most part, were not going to be requesting additional funds to backfill those positions. So the monies that were set aside for layoff mitigation, it was intended to pay for the first 6 months of this fiscal year. It is our understanding that departments would not be requesting those dollars.
It complicates it even more because when we did it, my understanding was it was set aside for the second 6 months, and that we would be picking and choosing among which positions we'd save and whether there were better positions than the ones being laid off that were perhaps unfilled. So I understand now the interpretation has been changed after the fact, but not very convincing for me. So it digs
That
me
was
in a
our
deeper hole.
understanding, yes.
I would say it was our understanding as well that the funds were for the first 6 months because the positions were only included in the budget for 6 months.
That's correct.
They expire, the position authorities actually expire December 31st, and so there would be no positions to pay for the second 6 months of the year, based on the action that council took.
Yeah, very different understanding of the discussion. So, but we may not be in any better financial position to deal with it as it was originally discussed. So, I don't know, Mr. Zine, you actually have projects in your district. How do you think council members would feel about using their AB 1290 funds?
Well, I can't speak for my colleagues, we have it earmarked for other projects, and that's the problem. It's for projects that we're trying to finish up, especially those of us that are terming out in a few months. And this would probably go beyond the few months. So those funds that are there, that we have earmarked for projects, I don't think it'd be appropriate for us to tell council members what to do with the dollars that they have for discretionary issues in their districts. That'd be a problem. And since you don't have any of them
Right.
in
So,
your rich area of the
yeah,
west
so
we got the
May-
poor valley that has to suffer.
May I add something? The planning department, if these positions are approved, the planning department would need to include them in their budget proposal for 2013-14.
Right.
And so the funding that would be requested right now would only be through the current fiscal year. And then any additional positions would be discussed as part of the greater budget deliberation. So a funding source for those positions on a longer-term basis would be part of that, the entire budget discussion.
and what about the managed hiring issue? What is the reason that this would need to go through managed hiring after it's been vetted as much as it has?
They control the money.
We understand that dilemma. The Managed Hiring Committee consists of a representative from our office, the mayor's office, and the CLA's office. And there has been agreement that reports to council authorizing positions would not create an exemption from managed hiring to allow that committee to exercise the authority that it was granted under council. So we do not, as a matter of practice, include that in our reports.
Well, Mr. Zine, what are your thoughts on this? You were about to make a motion, so.
I make a motion that we move forward with the recommendation from the CAO. That's my motion.
Yeah, what do you think about trying to address the managed hiring issue?
Well, that's a whole nother entity, and I think that the CAO and the CLA and mayor's office and all the folks that are involved in that look at the dollars on a daily basis and decide. We talk about the UB, which is where it's going to be appropriated from. It doesn't have to take a long time to manage hiring. It could be
It does
expedited
not.
through. It
It
could be a swift measure, and if Mr. LeGrand will go down there and talk to them, maybe that'll help, since he is the general manager.
What?
You've been short for a long, long time, so I think there'll be sympathy. I don't really want to change what the managed hiring does. I think there's a legitimate purpose for that. But I think if the general manager, Mr. LeGrand, goes down there and talks to them, that might help speed it through the process.
Why don't we move this motion forward and ask that it be expedited?
We can do that.
In the,
How about
As-
forthwith?
as-
Let's say a forthwith.
Well-
Forthwith.
we'll do, hey, we'll do that.
Yeah,
There's what?
2 other committees.
Oh, well, hey, let's
And-
forthwith to the other committees.
And maybe we can request that the committees consider waiving the item as well.
There you go.
Whatever ways we can move this forward. I mean, we know we're going to do it at this point, so I don't see any reason for slowing down the process.
Let's
And
go into
both
budget.
myself and Sharon have connections to the people on those committees. We will make sure we talk
Let's
to
go into
our
budget and
representatives.
finance and planning and land use, so it's Mr. Reyes and Mr. Kokorian. So you may want to talk to them, too.
And
Okay.
then item number 2.
You guys have proof?
Yes, that clearly was approved by both of us. And item number 2.
The city administrative officer has submitted a report. This has to do with the establishment of a new asset management strategic planning unit in the office of the CAO and related staffing for that unit. This item also has been referred to Budget and Finance Committee.
Okay, if we could have the CAO's report on this?
Yes. Good afternoon, Patty Huber from the CAO again. Before you is a report recommending the addition of 4 staff to establish an asset management strategic planning unit in the CAO's office. The main focus of this unit is going to be identifying opportunities and providing the framework as well as performing preliminary analysis on city assets and planning needs in the city. The impetus for this request really is the city's current situation with the CRA having been dissolved and needing to develop a new mechanism for providing economic development in the city. We have related efforts going on, including a current consultant study. Council approved conceptually the establishment of an economic development department and associated nonprofit. That study is underway, and we're expecting a final report in December. We're also looking at best management practices in the asset management arena overall, and that RFP is in process, and a consultant is going to be selected probably by early December. what we really envision this unit doing is beginning to lay the groundwork for all of these efforts in order to really start looking at city assets, identifying those ones that can be used for economic development purposes, so that as this new economic development department and entity come up, we have laid the groundwork so that then hopefully they can hit the ground running and start developing projects as soon as possible. We will also be looking at efforts internal to the city, such as consolidating city operations into appropriate space for reducing city costs, as well as potentially providing opportunities by freeing up property that could then be used for economic development activities. If you have any other questions, staff is here to help answer as well.
Now, your report recommends transferring $193,000 from GSD to the CAO for contractual services. What exactly are these contractual services? Who's it paying for?
Maria Cardenas with the CAO's office. That's half the funding that GSD has in its budget for real estate consultant services.
So who are we actually hiring?
They're usually brokers, appraisal companies.
Okay, and your report states that costs for direct salaries will be financed by surplus properties that weren't in the budget. How are we financing the indirect and related costs?
At this point, the indirect and related costs are essentially absorbed within the budget. For instance, our pension costs have already been paid to pensions. On a go-forward basis, the positions would be folded into the budget, and those costs would be paid through the general city budget on a go-forward basis.
Okay, and how much is currently in the surplus properties revenue account, and why would we not spend that to close our budget gap instead of paying for new employees?
You mean in the real estate fund that is the 50% share to the council districts? I'm not sure if that's the fund you're talking about, because otherwise it gets split 50% between this general fund and, not sure what fund we're talking about, I'm sorry.
Is the name different? What is that?
I believe the councilman is asking about the surplus property revenues that are being generated and why they wouldn't be used to close the budget gap, the surplus property proceeds in general, why they wouldn't be used to close the budget gap as opposed to being used for positions.
In the 12-13 budget, there was zero was estimated in surplus property revenue for the Department of General Services. They held an auction October 31st and did sell one property where the proceeds would go into the general fund. We're then asking that part of those proceeds be used to fund these positions.
So the positions essentially will help us track and, in some cases, market those properties well enough that there would be money to fund them and presumably then some.
In the long term, that would be goal, yes.
Okay. Will this also go through managed hiring?
Yes.
Okay.
We don't even get to exempt our own office from managed hiring, so.
Yeah, I guess that wouldn't look too good, so.
Yes.
As much as we would hope it not slow down the process too much, I guess you'll face the same problems that everyone else faces.
We would note that we did request to exempt 2 of the positions from civil service, a senior project coordinator and a principal project coordinator. That is, again, to provide opportunities for current or former CRA employees, opportunities to apply for these positions.
Mr. Zion, any questions?
CAO says that we have a major financial problem.
Yes.
We have a major deficit. Then the CAO recommends that we establish additional positions. Isn't it rather contradictory to say one thing and then to establish a new unit, asset management, strategic planning? It seems that it's contradictory for what the CAO keeps telling us, that we don't have money, they're going to lay off 160 civilians from the police department, and we're hiring folks on this side. It doesn't seem to make sense.
I understand the sort of the paradox of that. However, we really view economic development as a key component of the city getting out of our current structural situation. We need to find ways to grow the economy in the city. And as I said, we have the study going on for how to create a new economic development model within the city. Part of that is going to require that they have some assets to work with, properties within which they can put out for economic development opportunities. There is no capacity in the city right now to go and identify that and develop those opportunities, to have them to hand off to this entity. And that's what we're proposing here, to spend some money to allow us to lay the framework and then develop a way to start growing our way out of what is our financial situation. It's a component of how we're going to get to a better spot. And so while it seems counterintuitive to do this, it really is critical. Otherwise, you're going to create a new economic development entity, and then somehow all this work is going to have to be done, and it's just that much further behind.
But if we lower the cost of doing business and make it easy and accessible, like the projects in my district along Sherman Way, they're sitting abandoned, vacant, vandalized. If we could clear title, we have developers that are ready to go in there and build right now.
And we would be viewing that, if those are properties that are owned by the CRA, AB 1484, and I tend to get the number wrong on the legislation, so I will apologize if I've gotten the wrong piece. It required the development of a long-range asset plan for CRA-owned properties. And so that will be ongoing and is required to be developed by about April of 2013. It was done in recognition that the original legislation said that the successor entities just needed to dispose of all of the assets in what essentially would have been a fire sale, and meant that all these properties would hit the market and flood the market and depress prices. 1484 created a mechanism for a longer-range asset plan that would hopefully allow for a more measured, thoughtful disposition of those assets. The city will have opportunities to look at either some of the properties that might be eligible for governmental uses. We have a couple properties that were converted into parks. We would envision those being governmental uses, that the city could get those, and then they would go to recreation and parks. Other properties that are in redevelopment areas, the city would have an opportunity to look at taking it for a redevelopment purpose, but we really just need to get to what that plan is, and part of this group would help look at some of those issues as those properties become available for the city. We would not be able to take advantage of every single piece of property that the CRA owns, because we're not going to be able to make an argument for every single one of them. It depends on what they are. But we would look at what those opportunities would be as this plan gets developed by the DLA.
But while we're going through this process, it's now over 2 years since they've been sitting vacant, abandoned, vandalized.
Unfortunately,
saying do something, and we're just now going to establish another entity, asset management strategic plan, another unit with people. And as we discussed in item number 1, we're still not addressing the problem of what we've encountered because the CRA dissolving, which I don't know if you have one in your district or where you live, but the people who live around there are very frustrated, and all we're doing is, I think, creating more bureaucracy and not getting the job accomplished of clearing up the mess, because it's a mess.
our office has been working closely with the CRA on a lot of issues, but since the city is not the successor entity, some things like the asset management plan are not in our control. They have to develop it. It's required by state law. The demise of the CRAs on a statewide basis has just been horrendous, and I think it's just even bigger in Los Angeles because we had the biggest redevelopment agency in this state. I can't control the process. largely designed by state law, which was not particularly well-written. We've gotten some cleanup legislation in 1484 to address some of the bigger things like just the wholesale selling of assets and so on, but it's still established process and timeline, and I can't make it go faster, even though I would like it to. But we can put people in place to try and start dealing with those things and being in a proactive position to address some of those issues as the timing allows us to.
I'm not blaming you, but the state did no service to the community.
I would 100% agree with that.
And it's extremely frustrating to deal with the constituents that we tell them that, and they don't want to hear that. They want to hear something's going to be done. It's going to be done yesterday. Not that we're going to establish more process. They want to see action, and I don't blame them, especially when you see how the properties have been destroyed, vandalized, and turned into real eyesores in the community that, with the CRA involvement, was supposed to turn it around to make it better.
And eliminate the blight.
And in fact, it's created more blight than was there before.
And we're looking towards our new economic development entity to help start working on those things. It's a process, and we're going to have to go through the steps to put in place what a new economic development model for the city will look like, put all the pieces in place, and some of what we're trying to do is lay the groundwork for that, and that's part of what these positions will be focused on, so that as this department and nonprofit get up and running, that hopefully we have things that have been prepared and we're able to hand to them, and we're able to help facilitate them through this process.
And by the time it's done,
The goal for the economic development entity, we're planning to have a report in December with the establishment of the department and the nonprofit, hopefully by the beginning of the fiscal year, assuming that council approves everything.
that's next July.
Sooner if possible, but July at the latest.
Maybe the controller will do an audit on that.
I don't know the controller wants to step into the CRA
I
mess.
think the controller would love to do that.
Maybe the next one might want
The
to.
next one would.
The other interesting thing with this proposal, in addition, is that it also will look at assets that we own but aren't fully filling up. So there are places where I know we lease properties for city functions and city employees, and then other places where we own property and there are open spaces. And we haven't been able to coordinate that as well as we could because we don't have this function, so.
And we will be looking both internally to improve city operations and look at opportunities for eliminating leases, as well as what the economic external opportunities are.
And again, hopefully the efficiencies that creates will help pay, or maybe even more than pay, for the cost of this unit. We have one speaker from the public, Steve Kaufroth.
Steve, tell us how you feel about the CRA.
Tell us how I feel about the CRA. I lament all of the problems with the dissolution of the CRA, but I would be remiss if I did not also point out that it was the CAO's office who recommended that the city not become the successor, and therefore be out of control of many of the things that it could be in control of. But that is a decision that is now water under the bridge. Now we have to figure out what to do going forward. Obviously, economic development, we totally agree, is critically important to the city. We had hoped that in becoming the successor, the city would have, taken a more advanced step in taking economic development back under the wings of the city. Now it will have to wait until summer next year, maybe longer. But in any event, we are supportive of doing whatever economic development that the city can and does need to do. We believe it's very important to bring the staff on board who have the skills to do that. And obviously, we believe that CRA staff who is formerly doing that is in the best position to get the city on the ground and running, And obviously, there are a number of people who are in a position to come and do just that for you. We're supportive of the recommendation to exempt a couple of the positions. Obviously, 2 is better than none. We would look, favorably towards having more positions exempted so that we can make sure and transition that staff and do the best work for the city. And we appreciate your support in that respect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have a motion?
Yep.
Okay,
I don't know what it is, but what do you think it is?
I think you're going to recommend supporting the CAO's recommendations.
Not a great frustration.
And I will join you in that.
I'm just frustrated with what's happening.
And that will pass unanimously with a certain amount of frustration
How many are
reflected.
frustrated? Yo! All right, thank you very much.
Item number,
Variety of reasons.
yes. Item number 3.
Item 3, the city controller has submitted a report. This has to do with staffing associated with the expansion of the city's accounting assistance resource program, and this item is also referred to Budget and Finance Committee.
Okay, if we could have a brief report on the item.
Good afternoon, City Council members. Shane Min from the Controller's Office. The Controller's Office is requesting an expansion of the accounting assistance program that the City Council and the Mayor approved in 2010. Funds were approved in that, $250,000 were approved in that year, and the funds have been carried over year after that. And the program has been very successful. At this point of time, 9 city departments are using 12 retirees to help them in their accounting functions. However, what we found is that, there are limitations to the program, and some departments are finding it difficult to find help, especially in the entry-level positions. And we are suggesting an expansion to the program by including an internship program for college students who are close to graduation. To that effect, the expanded program will operate within the funds that are already in existence, so we're not asking for any additional funds. What we are asking for is that the City Council approve certain positions, substitute positions, because the DPO is already out and these positions are not included in the controller's DPO. We are asking that an administrative intern, 1 and 2, administrative trainee, student professional worker, and student worker be included as a for the CEO provide substitute authorities so that we can hire interns to help out departments in their accounting functions. These positions will be exempt. We would like to run this similar to the current program, which basically expedites the hiring of retirees. We get approval to hire retirees in advance, and as the departments come to us with requests, we look at appropriate classifications and retirees and select a retiree to come in. We would like to run this program in a similar fashion. We will, if the City Council goes ahead and approves this program extension, we will include a request in the budget for the next year for these authorities to be added to the DPO.
And do you think this winds up presenting these new workers with a career ladder? I mean, is there any chance that they'll be eventually hired full-time as city employees?
There are several advantages to this program. We did a kind of a short survey of the college courses that are being offered in the Cal States in the region. And out of 200 accounting courses, only about 4 courses are being offered in governmental accounting. What we've seen is that the city requires not only accounting assistant help, but we also require quality accountants to apply for jobs who have knowledge of governmental accounting. We hope that this program will familiarize students, number 1, in governmental accounting, number 2, increase the interest of these students in governmental accounting, and hence provide an impetus for local colleges and universities to provide more courses in governmental accounting.
Oh, that sounds like a positive.
And also, if the civil service program can be daunting to anybody who's not used to it, and if they come in, city employees can and guide them and mentor them in the procedures to apply for civil service positions. And if that brings in more quality people, more interest to civil service accounting positions, that's better.
And are these positions also subject to managed hiring, even though they're internships?
We would go to managed hiring to get them approved.
You would or wouldn't?
We would. I think we would have to.
Mr. Zion, any questions or comments?
No.
Well, we'll move the item without objection. And that is it. So we are adjourned. Thank you. And don't forget to vote.